that need from the external world. Maybe it serves you once, then you're addicted to that external world, continuing to be that way, and that is just not how the world's built. We out here. What does that even mean? I have no idea what that phrase means, nor do I know what the TikTokers are talking about when they say that. But I do love it. And we out here. That is for certain. And today's reflection that we out here with is on a phrase that I've mentioned on the podcast before, but never done an episode on it. And it's this phrase that my wife and I will say back and forth to each other. And that is, happiness is not caring either way. This phrase is based on the Vedantic principle of vairagya, which is Sanskrit for non-attachment. You have this in so many great traditions. You've got within Christianity, the kingdom of heaven is within you, not based on some external circumstance. You have got Stoicism that talks all about indifference to external events. You've got Taoism that talks about flow, going with nature, harmony with nature, however it is unfolding. You've got Upekkha with Buddhism on equanimity in the midst of external circumstance. You have all of these traditions that talk about cultivating this inner state independent of external events and circumstances. What's beautiful about the phrase happiness is not caring either way is that it's both a practice and it is the effect of practice. In other words, you have this practice of, okay, happiness is not caring either way. However it shakes out, however things unfold, happiness is not going to be in those external events, that financial milestone, that relationship goal you might have, personal goal that you might have set up for yourself. Happiness is not in hitting that personal record, your cycling time. Happiness is not catching 7 waves. We caught 5 yesterday. Happiness is not caring either way. 2 waves, 8 waves, going out in the ocean and just being happy to be out there, midst of nature, not caring either way. That's true happiness. Obviously, a false happiness is one that's based on only getting personal records because, well, that's a pretty sad state to require the impossible. Your health will decline, personal records. Michael Jordan is not necessarily winning any dunk contests these days. Wrapping ourselves, our happiness up into external events that we cannot control, that's not only misguided, but that is a recipe for unhappiness. That's why all of these traditions harp on this over and over and over again, that happiness, as Schopenhauer said, happiness is difficult to find within oneself, but impossible to find anywhere else. It's not easy to cultivate it within ourselves. Getting to a place where you're happy either way with a set of circumstances or what might unfold is not easy. It's not our default. But it is impossible to find happiness, true happiness, in some outcome. I remember, and I've seen, I could tell stories on the upside, massive amount of money wired into a bank account, and 4 hours later, nearly forgetting about it on the day that the wire came through for selling a company, and 4 hours later getting a $72 parking ticket and being just about as frustrated as I was elated for 4 hours before. It's hilarious what the mind does. We're dealing with death and recognizing on the other side of death or health scare of my own, sending me to the ER for my heart to be shocked back into rhythm with those paddles from TV shows and movies. I call it a cardioversion. Each one of these circumstances, these external circumstances, it was as much good as it was bad. The things that I would have done anything to avoid that I thought were just infinitely negative. Failure of a company, death of a sister, end up being some of the things that I look back and feel so blessed to have gone through. Some of the hardest things that we can go through, that I would have done anything to avoid, end up being the very things that I look back and say, wow, it's perhaps the most valuable thing that I went through in that stage of life. We are terrible at value judgment. Things that we would have done anything to avoid end up being some of the greatest blessings of our life that we still, if given the chance, would choose to avoid. And yet, divinity shapes our ends. Luckily, we weren't the author of that external circumstance. George Bernard Shaw has this great framework of, if you can get comfortable with the worst case scenario, if you can actually look it in the eye instead of try to avoid it, instead of scared shitless to even look in its direction, if you look it in its eye, get comfortable with the worst case scenario, all other cases become more likely. Remember with my last company, we barely sold it, barely just skin of our teeth, sold it to Airbnb. And I remember thinking, dude, we might have to close up shop after the better part of a decade spent 7 days a week building this. We might have nothing to show for it. And I remember that George Bernard Shaw, the concept of becoming comfortable with the worst case scenario and feeling like, okay, yeah, if we had to close up shop, no one's going to die. I'd be free to go wherever. And my wife and I got kind of excited about moving to Cape Town, South Africa, where I had lived before. Moving there, and I had this idea I have no idea why I had this idea. I was like, I'll just write. I was like, I'll just reflect on this whole experience and write. Still sounds somewhat appealing to have had that opportunity of freedom. And when you give yourself that gift of looking in the eye of the worst case scenario, getting comfortable with it, then it frees you up like a surfer that isn't so scared shitless of getting rocked by a wave, is loose, free, knows, yeah, if I wipe out, that's like part of it. I'm going to wipe out a couple times. And there are worse things. It's not going to be that bad. The freest surfers are perennially aware. They're completely aware of that worst case scenario. Maybe even the big wave surfers and death. I mean, some of them seem to be like, it's like those crazy mountain climbers. They almost have a death wish where they seem to be very comfortable, seem to be very trans life, very comfortable with that potential outcome. And it frees them up to where that outcome doesn't happen. Frees up the big wave surfer to ride the wave instead of paralyzed by fear. And in most of our lives, we don't have that fatal scare. It's more like we're rocked by the paralysis, the fear of, am I going to get this job? Is this financial outcome going to happen? Is this person going to like me back? And it's so helpful to just come back to this phrase. Happiness is not caring either way. It's a practice. It's also just an awareness of what is There is no happiness in needing that external circumstance to unfold the way it is, because even if it does, your next thought is, oh my God, I'm putting all of my hopes, my happiness in the external world, and it could shift again. It could change. Something else could happen that rocks us. You get that financial milestone, and now maybe my health might crumble in front of me, and death of a child, of a spouse. That need from the external world. Maybe it serves you once, but then you're addicted to that external world, continuing to be that way. And that is just not how the world's built. The world is opposites. The world is change. The world is temporary. But happiness in any scenario, it's the one permanent state. We're told over and over again. It's the one permanent state that we can attain, and it's the one permanent state. It's the only permanent state that is. That state within ourselves. That bliss within ourselves. Because it is difficult to find it. It's difficult to find it within ourselves, but it is impossible to find it anywhere else. That's today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.